Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
I'm Dion Mitchell here with my co-host Mehul and Anjaria for our first shelter-in-place coronavirus-era episode of Crime Redefined. That's right, we are home podcasting. This pandemic has had a profound effect on our nation's health and economy, but it's also led to unprecedented changes in our criminal justice system. You know, Mehul, I've received a lot of emails and text messages and phone calls from people, actually across the states and some people in Europe asking me what LA is like right now. And there's two great movies that kind of draw a great visual. And for the older folks out there listening, it's Omega Man with I think it's Charlton Heston, and then Or Legend with Will Smith. And that's a little bit the look that's out there right now. And it's just crazy to go down Hope Street from our office or get on the harbor of the 110 and just see nobody. I just feel like, you want to go drive 90 miles an hour around the city because you can.
Well, in our show's intro jingle, it says, coming to you from US Bank Tower, high above Los Angeles. And, that's the last place we want to be today. So we are absolutely remoting it from our respective bunkers. And since I routinely go to the courts and jails in LA County, I've been monitoring the developments very closely to kind of see, with regards to my DNA consulting, what business can I do and what simply can't be done. And it's changing by the minute. I guess the side benefit to the shutdown is that there's absolutely no traffic. So if you do need to go somewhere in LA, I don't know where you can go, but, go at rush hour, go on a Friday, doesn't matter. I think what strikes me the most is going down Grand on the way to the US Bank Tower. And you've got the Disney Concert Hall. You've got some other venues for music and theater. You've got some cafes. And normally that's just bustling with activity and cars. And it's just completely dead. And that is absolutely freaky.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like the feel that they've cleared traffic for a movie that's getting ready to be filmed. It's kind of hard to get your head around that this is for real. It's just surreal. That's all you can say, is just to see these places that are usually just, busting at the seams with activity completely vacant.
Well, speaking of that, Disneyland obviously had to close down. And I think originally they said March 31st. Now I understand it's essentially indefinite. They're targeting mid-April, but they just don't know. So if that's not a sign of the apocalypse, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Who knows how long this is gonna go on. I think you just gotta, stay at home, follow the directions. I guess make sure you've got plenty of toilet paper. That seems to be the hot item these days. But talking about what you're going through at going to county and Men's Central Jail, that's really what we're going to hit today, and talk about not only the adaptations of the criminal justice system in Los Angeles and nationwide, but also how this affects people on a personal level. We thought the system was broken before, but this is a whole new level of dysfunction.
Yeah, that's true. And issues of lack of fairness and lack of efficiency and the slow-moving wheels of justice are now all exacerbated. I mean, trials have been essentially stopped for, perhaps 3 months, depending on the jurisdiction. And we were already so far behind in the court system. This is, once we start up again, it's actually going to be a nightmare trying to catch up. And, there's some bigger issues than that. You think about paying the ultimate price for a crime you did not commit. Okay. Normally we think of that as, well, I was placed in jail when I was 18. I was in for 40 years. There was some sketchy testimony, whatever. And then Innocence Project comes along and, but for the grace of God gets me out on DNA, whereas I could have been, executed. That's one meaning, but now it's different, right? So let's just say I'm arrested for something relatively minor. Maybe I'm pulled over and the cops think I have drugs, and maybe I really didn't, but at the end of the day, what am I going to do until I have my day in court? So they throw me in jail. Perhaps I can't afford bail. And what if now there's a coronavirus outbreak? I'm dead before I even get to court. And kind of seems ridiculous, but man, that could happen.
Yeah, I think some of the jurisdictions are just, not even arresting them because of that fear. You don't want to put any more people in jail. And then you're right. I mean, you could go in for something simple, be there for, days, weeks, months, and then end up getting this. And then are they going to transport you from the jail to the hospital? Probably not. You're going to end up dying in jail. It's a really frightening example that I'm afraid is not really far-fetched in the current climate. I mean, when is your day in court coming? I mean, many of the courts are shutting down or already shut down.
Well, the Legal Aid Society in New York, they actually filed a lawsuit on behalf of 32 defendants. And recently, on the coronavirus issue, they were held for pre-trial, meaning they didn't have their day in court yet, per se. And the Manhattan Supreme Court actually allowed 16 of them to be released. And the reasoning was interesting. It was due process violations. So due process means that, the government just can't arbitrarily take your life or your liberty or your property. So essentially they're saying, listen, while someone's waiting for a trial, we can't guarantee that their life's not going to be taken. So, they're out of jail. That's some serious issues. And kind of going back to my, hey, I get popped for drugs and I'm in jail. We could actually use that example to highlight a number of issues and maybe kind of revisit some of the issues in our other podcast episodes. And, maybe we're going into everything that could possibly go wrong, but I think that it's instructive. So going back to, I get pulled over, I've got something that looks like drugs, and I tell them, well, it's not, it's this or it's that, whatever. But the cops whip out their little field test kit for drugs. It's a presumptive test. You've seen it. They scoop up a little bit of the powder, put it in there, shake it up, and typically either it turns purple or blue, depending on what they're testing for. Well, it's a presumptive test, right? It doesn't mean that it's drugs. It means like, it could be. Let's arrest this guy and go from there. Well, there's been a huge problem with false positives on these. And so what could happen is you're arrested based on that. And, typically you might sit in jail for a while and then there's some further testing and you're free to go. There's a lot of hassle. But then again, think about the issues we talked about in the Massachusetts drug testing labs. Maybe it doesn't get resolved for you if they're actually dry labbing. And so the price that you paid previously is you sat in jail a couple of months, legal bills piled up, might have lost your job. But now if you're in jail at all on some BS, it could be a potentially deadly situation.
That's right. And it's been said that the jails and prisons are proverbial tinderboxes for coronavirus. Once an inmate or employee gets it, you could go anywhere from, showers, overcrowding, the cleanliness, people serving your food, just, inmate to inmate, normal contact, being in the yard for exercise, whatever the case is.
Yeah, I'll just add a few. Let's say that I'm handcuffed and I've got a cough or sneeze. I can't cover my mouth. Hand sanitizer is all the rage out here in the free world, but you can't have sanitizer in the jail. Why? It's got alcohol in it. It's party time. Just overall bad hygiene. Could be that inmates are sharing soap. They're not provided with a soap dispenser everywhere or, nice body wash. Family members obviously can, put money on the books so they can go to the commissary and have all of these things, all the hygiene supplies and all of that. But, not everybody has that. And let's think about the economic impact of this shutdown as well. Let's say a family is putting money on the books for an inmate so that he or she can have the proper food, the proper hygiene materials. Well, if the family member's out of work, then the inmate doesn't get the benefit of that. And it's just really a big snowball effect.
That's right. Let's go back real quick to the you getting arrested for drugs.
Okay.
Where you might normally – what's that?
I said okay.
Whereas you
this is hypothetical, remember.
That's right.
I'm not retelling the history here. Okay.
No, this is all just a hypothetical. So you get arrested for drugs, and you might normally have a hefty wait for your day in court. Now, with the court shutting down, there could be a huge delay. So not only is there a higher probability of you getting coronavirus, but you have lost a lot more freedom and encountered even more economic hardship. And it's an easy scenario to extrapolate out what can happen. You're in there for 2 weeks, and an extra 2 weeks. Lose your job, you could be evicted from your home. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And then just operationally, I think I mentioned this, but at least in LA right now, the attorney room in Men's Central Jail is not closed down. So you can make professional visits, but how many attorneys really want to go there? because they're not exposed to the inmates, but there's still a crowd of attorneys and investigators and all of that. So again, essentially your due process has been completely slowed down. And, I would say if you want to put the label shithole on something, place it on jails and prisons. I actually heard an interview just the other day with the LA County Sheriff, and he was talking about, there was a push for a big budget to basically rebuild the jails in LA County, and that didn't go through. And these are his words, but he said, well, he's essentially left with the dungeons that he has. So again, that's out of his own mouth. We've talked about the courts, the jails, the attorneys. I'm not really sure how law enforcement crime labs are impacted by this. I guess it's an essential duty, I would think. But it's definitely a different story with private forensic labs. As a matter of fact, I send all of my DNA cases to a private lab in the Bay Area. And of course, they were the first people in the nation to be completely shut down. And that lab right now can't do any work. So can you imagine how that slows down cases as well?
Well, that's a great point. Let's talk about that. Walk me through how coronavirus has affected any of your current cases.
Well, let me give you one big example. And unfortunately, because it's ongoing, same caveats, I got to be vague. I'm involved in a post-conviction case. Okay, the defendant is elderly, in his or her 70s. And the post-conviction process is actually going along very well. Well, one of the things that is in the mix is the DNA results, of course. That's very key in a lot of post-conviction cases. Well, that testing has been completely stopped because of the shutdown. So the court is looking to schedule a hearing about possibly an exoneration, but you have to have the DNA results. So even if the court opens up, the lab is shut down. So everything is at a standstill. Meanwhile, you've got an elderly person in jail. So in this particular case, they're pulling out all of the stops to try to get this person out, considering the special circumstances. And, there is a provision called compassionate release. And this existed before the First Step Act. First Step Act broadened it, made it more accessible. But there are, if somebody's terminally ill, if somebody's elderly, let's say they're 75 and they've served, 30 years of their sentence, there's all of these type of scenarios where someone might get a compassionate release. And, you and I were just talking about Van Jones was on TMZ, and he thought that it's possible that particularly for the susceptible people like the elderly in the area of coronavirus, maybe there's an argument that a compassionate release could be used to get people who are at high risk out of the incarceration and possibly a death trap.
That would be a terrible scenario if, it turns out the guy didn't do it. He's exonerated by DNA or other evidence, and he ends up dying the coronavirus in there. I mean, I don't know. Since you're talking about loss of life here, I think it's one of those things where you err the other way. I mean, first of all, how much of a threat to society is this guy? So let him out now, put the leg monitoring on, ankle monitoring on him, bracelet, and keep tabs on him. And then when all this, reboots up and court systems are there, because who knows how long? I mean, you're talking basically the more the stay at home gets pushed, the further out it will take the courts, obviously, to ramp back up. So you could be into next year by the time everything is back up to speed.
Sure. We hope that once the economy goes, that it ramps up quickly, but we know the court system will not, because they are already backlogged. So even if it opened up tomorrow, I don't know how long the cascade effect would be, but it's probably months before things are running like they should be. Or not how they should be, how they used to be.
Well, on that, what is the exact state of affairs for Los Angeles with regard to jails and courts?
Yeah, it's interesting because it changes daily. And I know in LA County, back, say, about 2 weeks ago, they didn't know quite what to do. So between March 17th and 19th, they just said, we're just going to shut everything and call it a court holiday and see where this thing is going. And obviously the LA court has to take into consideration CDC guidelines, Centers for Disease Control, and the LA Department of Public Health. But a superior court presiding judge doesn't have the power to just shut down a courthouse because people have rights. There's a right to a speedy trial. There's statutes of limitations. People need restraining orders as an emergency. So the powers that were given to the LA Superior Court presiding judge were actually from the Chief Justice of the state of California. So the Chief Justice recently said, listen, we're not going to have any trials in California until the end of May. Why? How can you have social distancing if you've got 12 jurors, the attorneys, and everybody else? It's just impossible. The courtrooms aren't big enough. So in LA, where we're at now, is that only authorized personnel can even come into the LA courthouse. So the public is really not even allowed. You need to be a party to a case, an attorney, a witness, or the press. Even the clerk's office has been essentially closed and matters are, conducted over the phone. I understand at some of the courthouses there are drop boxes. So if you need to drop off court papers or something important, that can be done. There's certain things that have to go on. A great example is this emergency protective order, restraining order, this kind of stuff.
Right.
But criminal cases, right. And you even heard it with Durst. I mean, they postponed that. And right now, my understanding is criminal cases in LA, there's a 90-day continuance. So it's just all on hold. The one thing, and this goes back to the issues we were talking about, the one thing that's a priority is bail review hearings. So over the next couple of months, that's the priority. Why? If somebody could get out of jail, you damn well better give them the right in this climate.
Have you heard from any of I know you've got some friends that sit on the bench. Have you heard from any of them?
No, I really haven't. And I think that's because everyone's kind of in a tizzy. Nobody knows. They're trying to wrap stuff up. Now, there was one interesting situation in Sylmar. They actually had to close down the courthouse. And that's a juvenile delinquency courthouse. There's only 2 courtrooms. It's small. They closed it down for 3 days because a public defender who worked in that court, he was caring for a relative who tested positive. He ended up testing positive. So they had to close down the courthouse. Judges and staff members were on a 14-day quarantine, and they had to completely disinfect both courtrooms.
We've kind of given all the ugly side of this. So what are some of the other positive steps that the system has taken to address the virus?
I guess if you look at the situation in the jails, in LA County, the sort of average, there's about 17,000 inmates at any particular time. And as of now, about 10% of those people have been released. And they picked the low-hanging fruit first. That is, people who had 30 days or less on their sentence, people at a very low bail. In other words, most people maybe could have afforded that to get out, or it was a low-level offense. So about 10% of the population has been released. So what's the point of that? Obviously, people who are at risk, reduce the crowding. And now I understand there's a next wave of releases of up to 2,800 people that they're looking at. They've already released one batch of them, and they're targeting people who are specifically at risk for coronavirus. That is the elderly. State prison is a little bit different situation. As far as I know, in LA County, nobody's tested positive. State prison in Lancaster, one inmate has in fact tested positive. And I know that they're doing testing at a lot of the state prisons. The most testing is going on in Kern County, where I think they're testing about 32 people. So we're bound to get some bad news in the near future. There are 12 employees of the California Department of Corrections who did test positive. And I was reading, I think starting today, that all staff and visitors who enter a state prison in California are going to undergo that sort of high-tech touchless temperature screening. So that's a positive. We're reducing the crowding. Like you said, they're just arresting less people because, especially for these ticky-tacky offenses. Kind of going with the prisons, the other hotbed, of course, is New York. And my understanding is that there's about 75 inmates who've tested positive, 37 Department of Correction employees. So I talked to you about the work the Legal Aid Society is doing. They got some people released. I think that will continue to go on. Well, the other problem is, there's no longer visiting. So family member visits, that's gone. So they're trying to give the inmates some more access to free calls. And this is something I didn't know, but in a lot of prisons, maybe all of them, the inmate has to pay a copay if they want to go to the infirmary. And so they're waiving that, obviously. And some prisons are passing out more personal hygiene supplies to try to keep things cleanly. I don't really know about what else you can do. We've got 2.5 million people incarcerated in the United States right now. And here's one for you, Dion. I got a question. What do you think about these ICE detention facilities? You see those images of people in cages on top of each other. That's got to be a huge problem. And I don't know if they've mitigated that at all, but that just kind of image that was stuck in my head.
just wall to wall up against the screen. Yeah. Well, I have kind of two comments on that. One is I believe they're just turning people around, so they're not filling them up even more. And then I think they're maybe even going into some of the detention centers and actually removing people, and then giving them a what's it called, a retainer to appear at a later time. But they're actually putting them back to their native country or back into Mexico just to reduce the numbers. But my question in regards to like the detention centers is where's the jail is, and actually across the country, because so few people have been tested, what are the real numbers? I mean, because if you actually total up the numbers right now, just in LA, it's not that many, but not that many have been tested. So is this just an explosion that we're waiting to see once more people get tested, or right now is everybody just really lucky?
Well, I think, you could parallel LA and New York. LA has a lot less cases than New York, but they're also behind them on testing.
That's right.
Same is true in the New York jails, right? The figures I put out, 75 inmates tested positive. In California, it's just one. But I think you're right. It's a statistical fallacy just because there hasn't been testing. So, of course, the big issue in the jails is that it's going to spread like wildfire. Even out here, we're social distancing, except for the people at the beach, but there's taking some measures. In there, they can't take measures. So it has to spread like wildfire.
I mean, man, I don't even want to think about what that would look like if it really went through. I mean, where are you, how are you going to help these people, these men and women in prison right now? How do you get them? And
not to mention the employees. I mean, a lot of the employees are getting sick, and I believe that there was a fatality in New York. But anyway, it really affects everybody. And there's a lot of volunteers who go into these prisons, and other people who are not full-time staff, and
Yeah, I think that's we'll do a little turn here, and I think that's why you're getting some really big celebrity firepower involved with pushing for early releases for a lot of these men and women that are incarcerated right now. And one of those was producer Scott Budnick. I read a couple of interviews with him. It was really interesting. And if you don't know the name, he's the executive producer for The Hangover and Old School and Due Date and a lot of other movies that you would know. I think he was ran the production company for the producer and director of The Joker, if I have that right. He launched a anti-recidivism coalition and One Community Productions, which produces social justice content geared towards impacting laws. His latest project, Just Mercy, is out now, and that stars Michael B. Jordan. But the bottom line is this guy is putting his money and his talent where his mouth is to change policy. So right now, he's really, really out in front of pushing. I hate to use the word early release because that's not. Would it be early release?
I meant to say this earlier, but let's go a little criminal justice 101. And this seems like a basic point, but I think it's important. There's a huge difference between jail and prison. So if I'm arrested, I go to jail, and I may be held there for some period of time before I even go to court where it's decided if I'm guilty or released. So a lot of people in jail are pre-trial. They haven't even been convicted. Now, let's say I get a real small sentence, a month or something like that. I'll stay in county jail. I won't go to prison. If I get convicted of murder, I'm now going to state prison. So people in state prison, whether or not they actually did it, they're all convicted. So this idea, some people say, just letting them all go. Well, some of these people haven't even been in front of the judge.
That's right. Yeah. So that's actually that's my mistake because he's Scott Budnick is actually more on the prison side of. In fact, I think it's all on the prison side of early release. So before this bug really spreads through, all the penitentiaries in California.
Right. Well, okay. Now, speaking of that, let's stay on the celebrity track a little bit. And, with good reason, New York Legal Aid Society, ACLU, all these kind of people are making the case that, if nothing else, this violates due process. You shouldn't die when you're waiting for trial. But everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, right? So, okay, let's just go over a couple of names. And the latest one is R. Kelly, basically saying, listen, I'm going to die in prison because of coronavirus. What say you?
So I guess, as a good defense attorney, you're going to leverage whatever you can at the time. And so, one started and then now everybody else has jumped in. You've heard Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby now have, they're older. They kind of fit into that category. They're, not a super threat to society. Are you going to penalize them again? because you can't protect them from getting the coronavirus? I mean, it's a great question.
Right. And yeah, so I mean, the R. Kelly sticks out to me because he's not elderly, and he just got there. Now you look at Bill Cosby, like, well, I mean, the guy, there's no doubt he's in bad physical shape. So at least there's some argument on the elderly thing there. But, in the standard course of business for a compassionate release, if you're elderly, you would have had to serve a lot of your time. Bill Cosby's been in for a year. But it's interesting, you think of Robert Durst. I mean, the guy hasn't even been through his trial yet. On one hand, you look at him and like, well, who's he really going to hurt? But the guy hasn't even had a trial yet. And, unfortunately, now there's potential for abuse.
Okay, so these guys are probably over 70. Okay, now is that the line? Do you go to 65 and all of a sudden does a guy 55 say, hey, I'm elderly, and you let out Weinstein and Bill Cosby, can I get out? I can be infected and I can die. So, and then, Weinstein, you just put in,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that the jails or the prisons can't make any efforts to quarantine people. I mean, there are infirmaries and stuff like that, but there's just limits to it.
Yeah, I mean, this is really a Justice Pandora box that I don't think that the best forecasters could have seen coming.
No, this is true.
So, Mehul, I think we covered everything. We certainly conjured up a lot to think about. I hope everyone out there is keeping their spirits up and staying healthy. We want to really thank our listeners and followers for your support. We hope our episodes provide you with some thought-provoking entertainment during this remarkable period in history. And don't forget to subscribe to Crime Redefined so you never miss an episode. Today's episode of Crime Redefined was sponsored by MBA DNA Consulting, LLC, located in downtown Los Angeles. Renowned forensic DNA consultant Mehul B. Anjaria bridges science and law by helping his attorney and inmate clients with complicated DNA issues in criminal and civil cases with the highest stakes. Check out mbadnaconsulting.com for more information and follow on Twitter at MBA Consult. If you are interested in sponsoring a future episode of Crime Redefined, please email us at contact@zerocliffmedia.com or through social media.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.